Well, I should begin by saying I'm very grateful to be involved in this conference. We've had a very rich series of presentations and much very helpful, illuminating discussion. And I'm afraid I'm going to sort of now contribute a bit of a damp squib. I have to begin with a big apology. When I was asked to make this presentation some time ago, I was fully confident that at the time of this presentation we would have a complete report. I thought, this is great, I can come along and I can tell you all about our findings and where we've got to. But the report, I think, will be out in February. So I have a real problem. I can't tell you what it's going to say because I don't fully know what it's going to say. So what I'm going to do, and I hope this provides some interest, is to just say a little bit about the way we've approached what is a very big and I think very difficult problem, and why it is, in a sense, still a work in progress. And I make no apologies for that, because I think we found that the process we're involved in just was going to take longer with the best will in the world, and so we are where we are. So, first of all, our remit. What were we asked to do? Well, sorry, I've touched the... Go back. I guess the broad remit here, I won't read it all, but as you see, what we're approaching here is a very broad field, as it were, asking to look at these developments, to identify and examine significant ethical questions raised by these developments, and to consider implications with regard to a series of quite specific issues and concepts and so on. How did we go about this? What was our process? Well, we had a working party. We had 12 members appointed in January 2003. I would make a couple of comments about that. I mean, I think something that I was very struck by is that in constructing a working party like this, you obviously look, you want a number of members who represent different kinds of interests and concerns in this field, different backgrounds. You talk to people, you talk around, you come down to a list of people, then someone writes them and asks them all whether they'd like to take part. And what really impressed me is that everyone approached said yes. And I think that's no trivial result. I mean, we're talking here about a group of very highly qualified, very busy people giving considerable proportions of time over a fairly long period of time to address a series of questions. So how did we go about this? Well, Nuffield Council over the years has effectively developed, if you like, a methodology for working parties of this kind. So we begin with evidence gathering. That may mean a number of different things. We, for example, had meetings where we brought together groups of people with a particular interest and knowledge of some particular aspect of the problem. And we questioned them, we asked them to tell us the way they saw the world and so on. We did other things too. We, in fact, commissioned a bit of work, and see Martin Bobrow at the back. Why he's relevant to this is because the work we commissioned was commissioned jointly with EGDA, the Expert Advisory Group on Data Access, which you've already heard something about. The work we commissioned was to look at a really important part of this issue, which is that people have a great deal to say about privacy, its protection, and so on. What we know very little about are the harms that may actually be occurring in the real world out there through privacy breaches. And the work we commissioned was to try and get at least a sort of sight of something about that, because I think it's clear. We talk a great deal about the privacy protection and so on the assumption, clearly, that harms will result if it's breached. But does that happen? What are the harms? So we have work commissioned there which helped us to think about that particular issue. We then did a public consultation. What's involved in this is drawing up a paper which sets out the issues that we think are particularly pertinent in our discussions, and we basically ask people what they think about them. And again there, I would point to the fact that we got a large number of responses from all sorts of people and individuals, organisations and so on, which provided us with a very rich source of material to think about. We then deliberate, quite a lot concealed by that word, and we then draft a report, and we're in the process of doing that, and that report will be published next February. Just some words about the sort of approach and the background. I mean, what we're concerned here with at root, I guess, are a number of developments that really follow one particular process and one particular development in information science. That's to say the digitalization of data and the development of means and ways of handling it. And what does that done? Well, it clearly opens a whole number of new opportunities to collect more and make more use of data of all sorts of different kinds. And from this, in the biomedical field, we confidently expect, many people expect, there will be all sorts of new opportunities for research which will lead to improvements in medical treatment, effectiveness, efficiency of medical care, increasing in general the power and pace of research more generally, and addressing other issues of public interest and hopefully contributing to the public good. And what we call here the repurposing, reuse of data, we refer to projects that do that as data initiatives, and they're at the centre of our consideration. And these are driven by, obviously, desires to realise scientific, economic and policy opportunities of various kinds. I should say we're concerned here really with two areas or two realms of work. One concerns medical records and the way they are used, repurposed and linked and so on. And the other is to do with the realm of research, where we're dealing with a whole series of kinds of research which have within their practices data linking, data management of various kinds, use of data and so on. Now, just a word, this I think is familiar territory. Sorry, I'm not moving my slides. Sorry, that was data initiatives. Talk a bit about the concerns. Well, I think these are all familiar and obvious to people in this room, but we've spoken a good deal about privacy risks, but not well known, lots of uncertainties in that area. We've also referred to public concerns. Here I use the example of care.data, and I think it's quite striking. People will be familiar to what happened when this initiative was announced. A lot of public reaction, discussion about how data was going to be used, the mode of consent, governance, and so on. So there's clearly public concern out there broadly about the field of data use and the threats to privacy and so on that may involve. I think it's important also to note here that our risks if we just sat and allowed this world to grow and continue, that there are, I would say primarily here, there are issues of public trust, certainly in the world of research. I think there are threats to the trust that exists largely about research projects, which come from the way people imagine or know that data is being used and the risks concerned and so on. Now, again, this is broadly familiar territory. We've talked about some of this today or yesterday, but there's clear tensions between the public and interest and the policy drivers to make more use of data and the governance systems that are designed to protect privacy issues. I mean, almost by definition, there's going to be a tension there between those two. And again, these are matters that have come up. We know there are limitations to what one might call the standard traditional approaches to governing the reuse of data. There's the issue of protecting privacy, let's say the limitations of the notions of anonymization and so on. There's issues around consent to protect autonomy. Again, those have, I think, been aired in various ways at times in these discussions. And then there's the issue of harms and identifying the harms that may accrue when there's a loss of privacy and so on. I think one thing that becomes clear in any discussions here is, and I think Graham referred to this, he talked about magic bullets. There are no magic bullets. I think what is perfectly clear is what we have to do is to do something different. There isn't a kind of single solution, but we need to find what we might describe as an ethically sound approach to data initiatives. And that's really been at the heart of our work in the Working Party. Let's say a bit about the sort of main issues here involved. So as I say here, the ethical use of data will need to build on reasonable expectations of data use with a background of certain principles. Respect for persons, that seems to us to be a primary obvious principle here. A person has strong moral interests in informational privacy and the disclosure of private information. Respect for human rights, and I suppose here in particular we perhaps would be thinking about limitations of the power of the state to interfere with the privacy of individual citizens. Then whatever governance systems that we will need to develop. The two clear issues here that will run through discussion. One is participation. The involvement of those with morally relevant interests in whatever the activity is underway. That, of course, will include participants, but here we're talking about the whole range of different interests, the researchers, and indeed society more generally, public interest and the involvement of publics. And secondly, we need to think about accountability. That's crucial in any government system. And I'd just say that we need to here consider what one might regard as two kinds of accountability. There's what we might refer to as official accountability, the legitimate judicial or political authority that may be involved, but also what we may refer to as social accountability, to do with the basically citizen engagement, the society more generally, more socially. So different data initiatives will have different objectives, engage in different interests, give rise to different expectations amongst parties. So, going back to the point I've already made, whatever else, we're not in a position to suggest there are a set of governance arrangements and procedures which will be appropriate to all initiatives. We can say something about what they are in general. So the way, and this has, of course, important consequences for the way we're organising our report. So rather than trying to provide a general account, what we're going to do in the report is to, in fact, use a number of examples of data initiatives, a set both in the areas of the use of health service data and another set in the world of research, to discuss real live examples pointing to what we see as good practice in terms of the ethical principles that we're working with here. And we will also include some bad examples of bad practice. I mean, the basic idea here that we can provide examples which we hope will be illuminating and that people can learn from. Now, I was going to end by making a number of personal remarks, not on behalf of the Working Party, about UK Biobank governance, as that is indeed what we're all here to discuss. I'm not going to do that beyond making one point, and one point which I feel has not been sufficiently emphasised, and I think it's important to emphasise, not least in the presence of Bill Lawrence today, because there's one part of the governance system that we've sort of glossed over. We've talked about the Ethics and Governance Council, pertinent questions raised about does it produce value and so on. But one of the things the Governance Council does, they are guardians of a framework. And what I would like to point out that the framework was, as far as I'm aware, something that had never been done before for a research project. And I think that's, very important to recognise, but it does seem to me that it's a really important instrument of governance, which I think one can make a strong case ought to be in place. It's a public statement. It talks about the relationships between the key parties involved, and it's there, it's up for discussion, and I think what was really important in the development of UK Biobank is there was indeed a long process of discussion of the framework, of the governance structure more generally, involving all the key interested parties, including the public. And I think that, looking back on it, was a really important point in history of the governance of research projects. But my point here is frameworks. I think I would argue that every project needs its framework. Thank you.